Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. Last week on our show, we talked about fixing low pH soils. Today, we're going to talk about the much more difficult challenge of fixing high pH soils, but you can absolutely do it on your farm. We'll explain how.
One topic in the fall that always gets to be a big one is how wet should I be harvesting my corn? Well, do I want to let it dry in the field or should I do something different at home? We'll discuss that today.
We've got a very common weed of the week coming up later in the show and an iron talk as well. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Stop losing money from your stored grain with the EndZone fan control system from Farm Shop MFG. The EndZone monitors outside conditions to run your fans so your grain naturally reaches ideal temperature and humidity. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
During our Farm Basics time each week, we'll take a topic that we commonly discuss on the farm and try to explain it to non-farmers. So if you are a non-farmer, you will understand what we mean by crop rotation. That's this week's topic.
When you drive by fields out in the country, you may notice, wow, that field was corn last year. This year, it's soybeans. Why are farmers doing different things? Well, there are a lot of reasons why farmers like to rotate which crop they plant in a particular field.
Yeah, so crop rotation is simply, we planted one crop last time, we're going to plant a different crop this time. The main reasons why farmers will do this include fertility, weeds, insects, and diseases, but there can be some other reasons too. So we want to kind of talk through some of those today.
Okay, one thing you need to understand too, when we talk about crops like corn, soybeans, and wheat, which are on a huge number of acres across the country, those are all annual crops. That means they're only going to grow 1 year in the field. So when you plant corn, it's got a 1-year life cycle, and now next year you've got to make a decision again about what you're going to plant. There are, however, some crops like alfalfa, for example, or even pastures that have perennial plants out in the field. And when a farmer puts alfalfa in, for example, he's planning on leaving it in that field for 3 to 5 years because it's a perennial plant.
Okay, here's the next thing. When we talk about corn and wheat, those are what we call grass crops or monocot plants. Then there are the other broadleaf crops like soybeans or sunflowers, and those are dicot plants. A lot of times when we're trying to stop diseases or insects, maybe even weeds, it's important to go from a monocot plant to a dicot plant and then back. So that's the type of rotation that most farmers will prefer across the United States.
In soybeans, one of the worst disease problems you can get is something called sclerotinia white mold. It impacts soybeans and a number of other broadleaf crops like sunflowers and edible beans, but it doesn't impact corn at all. So if you rotate corn into that field, you don't have to worry about white mold anymore. And if there's some white mold pressure out in that field, it has no home, no host crop to find. The same thing is true in corn. There's diseases like Gauss's wilt. It's a bacterial disease that can impact corn and some other grasses, but it doesn't have any impact at all on a soybean crop. So you can plant soybeans in fields that have lots of Gauss's wilt pressure and never have a problem.
So some of these diseases can last in the soil for several years. So if, let's say, we have a bad sclerotinia white mold field, we might just plant corn or wheat there for 5 years in a row, and then we go back to soybeans and the disease is gone and we can raise great soybeans again. And it's the same thing with the Gauss's wilt example. Okay, maybe we want to go raise some broadleaf crops for a few years. We come back, Gauss's wilt is gone. So that's just a good example of how we can use crop rotation as what we call a cultural practice rather than having to spray a fungicide out there, or like in the case of Gauss's wilt, there's no bactericide that will even control it. So this cultural practice of crop rotation is absolutely the way to go.
One last thing to think about is simply in a risk management standpoint of a farmer, which crop's going to be the best this year? Are you going to have a year, the kind of weather that really favors corn, or a year that really favors soybeans, or a year that favors wheat? Well, we don't know, and also we don't know what the market prices are going to be either. Maybe there's a lot of demand for corn this year. Well, it would have been a great year to raise corn. Farmers don't know what's going to happen, so a lot of farmers like to diversify their risk in their operation by planting their acres to a number of different crops. Then the other thing is simply timing and getting all the work done. Well, oftentimes corn harvest happens during a certain time of year, soybean harvest happens during another time of year, wheat harvest happens during another time of year. They can spread out the timing of their operations and keep busy all year long.
So there are a lot of reasons why crop rotation is very important on most farms, as is weed control. We'll talk about our Weed of the Week coming up later in the show.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH, rethink productivity.
When you apply phosphate fertilizer, it binds to calcium in the soil, becoming calcium phosphate, essentially tooth enamel. How much of this tooth do you think will become available to your crop? NutriCharge doubles your phosphate availability by protecting it from calcium fixation.
Downtime during spraying can lead to huge yield losses. Keep rolling with the Pentair Hypro Force Field. This pump features a unique self-regulated chamber that allows the pump to run dry while eliminating cracked seals, so you can spray longer and more reliably. Learn more at pentair.com/hypro.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Find love, and then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
One of the most challenging issues on many farms is high pH soil. Today we want to talk about how you can fix your high pH soil. But before we get into that, we've got to talk about how did the pH get high in the first place? What went wrong out there?
pH is really an indication of balance in your soil. If you've got one nutrient that's way out of balance, way too much of or not near enough of, you're going to see that pH fluctuating either to the low end or to the high end. Oftentimes in the high end of pH, we've got way too much calcium or way too much magnesium or way too much sodium. That's going to bring that pH up. And then if you notice on soil tests by grid soil sampling in small increments out in fields, like 1 acre grids to determine where pH is at, now you can see, okay, I've got a problem in this area of the field. Now we may look even further to see if we've also got a drainage issue.
All right, so Darren mentioned calcium, magnesium, and sodium. What he did not mention was salt. Those are the 4 things that we will commonly talk to people about in terms of high pH. So first of all, when you have sodium in the soil, that can raise soil pH roughly 4 to 1 compared to calcium. So sodium is a big deal. That's really number 1. Magnesium can raise soil pH roughly 1.6 to 1 compared to calcium. So sodium and magnesium are much more worrisome for us than just straight out calcium. So let's say that, for example, you've got this high pH. Let's say it's 7.5 or 8, 8.5. We want to see a complete soil test. So we do need the calcium, the magnesium, the sodium. We want to see soluble salts. We want to see base saturation. We want to see everything we possibly can. That's going to give us the best indication of what's truly raising your pH.
Most of the time when we find pH is rising in soils, and we've talked to so many farmers who have soil test data going back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or even more, and they see this gradual rise in soil pH, it's due to poor drainage. And when you look at things like soluble salts, and Brian mentioned sodium, when we don't have drainage, I mean, just the word alone, soluble salts, it's in the water solution in the soil, it's going to move. But if it can't get out the bottom because we've got a drainage issue in the field, salts are going to build up in that field and it's going to raise your pH.
So the first thing you have to do if you want to fix that high pH is you've got to have great drainage. A lot of times that means in a heavy soil, you're putting in drain tile. Once you have that drain tile in and your drainage is set, now we can start addressing the problems. And typically what we need to address the problems, if it's magnesium or let's say it's sodium, a lot of times people are throwing more sulfur out there. If you put out gypsum, for example, a lot of people will ask us about gypsum. Well, that's calcium sulfate. You're adding calcium to the soil if you need it, and you're adding sulfate to that soil. The sulfate can bind with either the magnesium or the sodium to form a salt. The point is, again, like Darren said, salts are leachable. So we can immediately flush out soluble salts when drainage is improved. When we turn sodium and magnesium into salts with sulfate, then those are leachable as well, and we can flush those out of a soil.
Now, one thing here I want to make very clear. Brian said improving drainage out in that field. I'm not talking about surface drainage. You could make some channels through the field and get surface water to run off a little bit faster, but this isn't what I'm talking about or what Brian's talking about here, because these salts are going to build up on the soil surface. Even with surface drainage, you're still going to see those salts getting pushed up in poorly drained soils, and you're still going to have that high pH problem.
Darren and I do talk a lot about elemental sulfur as well. That is a way that you can quickly lower soil pH. But just understand, the way that elemental sulfur lowers that pH is there's a bacteria in the soil that will convert the elemental sulfur over to sulfate. When that conversion happens, there's sulfuric acid that's created. There's acid created that's lowering the pH. But you're not going to convert it over to hydrogen sulfate, which is sulfuric acid, without that bacteria. The only way that bacteria will be there is if you have good drainage. So don't put elemental sulfur out if you haven't first fixed the drainage problem. Your soil is going to smell like rotten eggs. You're going to turn that sulfur into hydrogen sulfide, and that's a bad thing for your soil without good drainage. So have the drainage taken care of first, then you can use elemental sulfur. Now, how much do you need? No one on the planet knows that. There are universities that have put out charts. We found them all to be wrong. I'll just say this. Start with some elemental sulfur, try some lower rates, 100 pounds, 200 pounds, 300 pounds, something like that. See what happens and go from there. The heavier the soil, the more elemental sulfur you will need to lower that pH quickly. And the other thing that you're looking for is elemental sulfur that has a very small particle size. We need that elemental sulfur to break down very, very quickly. So if you have good drainage and you have that small particle size, you can get a fairly fast pH change. We've been able to lower soil pH on our farm from 8.5 to 6.5 in just a couple of years through the use of elemental sulfur after drainage gets fixed.
Now, with all this, like Brian mentioned, nobody really understands this elemental sulfur all the way that, hey, you have to put on exactly this many pounds and it's going to give you this exact difference in your soil. So take one field or part of a field and try it on a small scale on your farm and learn, and then you can take those lessons you learned from your farm with your climate and your soils to expand to the rest of your farm to fix those high pH areas.
You may have heard people say, oh, you can't fix a high pH soil. That's nonsense. Don't listen to those people. They don't know what they're talking about. Fix your drainage issue. Make sure you're looking real hard at your calcium, magnesium, sodium, and soluble salt levels. And yes, it's going to take some time, and you may need to put some elemental sulfur or some other form of sulfur out there, maybe some gypsum. It just depends on what your soil test looks like.
The other thing you may notice in some of these high pH spots in your fields are certain weeds, like maybe even our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
YieldTrack has tracks in its DNA. I have with me Matt Meyer, Lead Yield Track Planner Engineer from Norwood Sales. Matt, what makes these tracks so special?
Well, Bill, these tracks were designed with a spherical bearing as the main pivot that allows oscillation, camber, and steering from a single mechanism. The design has 5 degrees of camber to match the crown of the road, resulting in a faster and cooler road transport. Yield Track then uniquely locks out this camber in the field to maximize the belt-soil contact ratio, improving flotation while minimizing both belt wear and soil compaction. Finally, we add an in-field steering option for those who need auto guidance, especially those doing strip till, making this track system unmatched in the industry.
Well, thank you, Matt. You can only get these tracks on a Yield Track planner. Call Norwood Sales for more information.
Where we have run the Soil Warrior, we have harvested the best corn we have ever harvested in the history of Wrenwood Farms. Now, I'm kind of always wanting to push the envelope to see what else I can do to help enhance that emergence. Their ride is so much smoother. Their seed placement is even better. Where we had our best emergence and we've had our best yields was where we ran the Soil Warrior.
Engineered to be the most advanced concave system available, the XPR system threshes all crops, reduces grain loss, and significantly improves grain quality and storability.
Probably the biggest difference that we noticed right away was the grain quality. The sample was much better. With this XPR system, now we've cut down rotor loss significantly. I can switch out a 2-pound cover plate in just a few minutes and jumped about 30% more on our capacity.
Visit EstisPerformanceConcaves.com.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Harvest is well underway in parts of the country and just about to start in others. One of the questions you have to ask, though, is at what moisture percentage will I harvest my corn?
Well, how about soybeans, Darren? How about wheat? How about all these crops? And here's the #1 reason why we're talking about this today. You have decisions to make on your farm each fall, and these decisions amount to big-time dollars. I'll just give you an example on our farm. Over the last few years, we've had a real tough time with soybeans drying down right to 13%. We harvest a lot of our soybeans for seed. The seed company wants those beans at 12 or 13%. Well, you know how quickly beans can go from 13% down to 8. That's no good. Nobody wants those for seed production, and quite frankly, I don't want that either. When I've got 8% beans, I just lost 7.5% of my income. Here's how. For each 1 point of moisture, it's roughly 1.5% of shrink. So in other words, if I drop 5% of moisture going from 13 to 8, I multiply that times 1.5%, that's 7.5%. 7.5% of my income just gone. So here's what we ended up doing on our farm for soybeans. We now harvest most of our beans at 15 to 17%. We throw them in bins that have grain bin fan controls. So right from our phones, we can turn that fan on or off. We have sensors to tell us how we're doing for temperature and humidity outside. It's very simple with the charts that are out there. They've been out there for 100 years. If we have a certain temperature and humidity, we can absolutely get that grain to the right point. So we'll throw those beans in at 15 to 17% moisture, and within about 3 weeks, our beans are now right at 13%. That's ideal for the seed production, but it's also ideal for our net income.
I think about how many hours we've wasted in our lifetime waiting for things to get to exactly the right condition out in the field. And by being able to manipulate some of that in your grain bins, it gives you a lot more flexibility at harvest. Like soybeans, for example, we're waiting, and sitting around, and yep, we've got the machines ready, we got the crew ready. We just need those beans to dry down another 0.5%. Well, now you could get out there theoretically earlier, make better use of your time, and get harvest over with quicker. When we look at some of the recent harvest seasons that we've had where it's been really tight windows to get things done, this is very valuable for your farm.
Well, here's the other thing. Darren mentioned corn at first. We dry every bushel of corn. We encourage you to dry every bushel on the farm as much as you can, because we've got two big things. Number one, we need to get done earlier in our geography at least, so we can get any tillage we want to do, any fertilizer, soil testing, all that work done in the fall, maybe some tiling, so we have more time for all of that. The other thing is, what we have found is if we can harvest corn and really all crops a little bit wetter, we have far less harvest loss. We have far less that drops off before harvest. How many times have you been out there at harvest and you see a bunch of corn ears on the ground? You see soybeans on the ground. You see any crop on the ground. Well, that does you no good. So what we're trying to do is get out there at a better moisture, a little higher moisture, and if you get set up right on your farm, well, then it doesn't cost all that much to dry that grain. So for us, we've got a couple of continuous flow dryers. We have a great big tank for propane so we can hold semi-loads. We're able to do this very cost effectively, and we just encourage you, start looking at these things over time, and yes, it might take some time to get where you want to go, but if you can allow grain to dry in the field, great. Most of the time, unfortunately, though, you may not have the time, you may not have the desire to do that, and certainly you may not want the amount of harvest loss you have by letting that grain dry naturally in the field.
All this results in you maximizing your profit on each acre of your farm. And when you're making money out on the farm, it makes it so much simpler to control our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to do that coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
You may call our Weed of the Week pigeon grass, or maybe, oh, it's just a foxtail, but very specifically, it's yellow foxtail.
Even this, Brian, I talk to growers that say, well, I've got some annual grass out there, what do I do? No, you need to identify what annual grass you have. In the world of resistant weeds, where we're really good at identifying broadleaf weeds and even telling different pigweed species apart, you need to get good at identifying grass. And fortunately, this is one of the easiest ones to identify.
Yep, it is. All you're looking for is long tufts of hair at the base of the leaf blade. So this has got a hairy ligule, just like the other foxtails, but when you find those long tufts of hair right at the base of the leaf blade, you know you have yellow foxtail.
To get control of annual grasses like yellow foxtail, we like to go with a good pre-plant residual herbicide. So we're talking about things like Treflan or trifluralin. In soybeans, in corn, we're looking at the group 15s like Harness, and in wheat, we're looking at products like Prepare.
Okay, once we start talking post-emerge, there are lots of options in the broadleaf crops. So you go to soybeans, you can use Roundup, Liberty, Clethodim. Almost any grass control herbicide will kill yellow foxtail in soybeans. It's not so easy when we get to wheat and corn.
Well, in corn, I really like having the Roundup or Liberty option, but in conventional corn, Accent Q is going to be your best choice.
Okay, and in wheat, we'd probably suggest Axial. Discover is pretty good. Next Step NG. There are a number of them out there, but it's not as good when you mix those with broadleaf herbicides. So spray them straight if you've got a solid yellow foxtail issue.
Let's use a two-pass approach for the pre and a post-emerge application to stop our Weed of the Week, yellow foxtail.
That's it for our Weed of the Week, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
Maintaining your crops is as important now as it's ever been. Howler, a revolutionary fungicide from AgBiome, can help. It provides long-lasting protection from a broad spectrum of foliar and soil diseases that affect crops. Howler is OMRI listed, has multiple modes of action, and has minimal pre-harvest and re-entry intervals. It's flexible, easy to use, and is available right now. Visit agbiome.com/Howler to learn more.
Across the country and across county lines, no two operations are alike. You make the right decisions for the right acres, and no decision is more important than what you choose to plant. Expect it soon. Extend Flex soybeans. Elite genetics, now with the addition of glufosinate tolerance, giving you the yield you want with the choice you need. Extend Flex soybeans.
Where we have run the Soil Warrior, we have harvested the best corn we have ever harvested in the history of Renwood Farms. Now, I'm kind of always wanting to push the envelope to see what else I can do to help enhance that emergence. Their ride is so much smoother. Their seed placement is even better. Where we had our best emergence and we've had our best yields was where we ran the Soil Warrior.
How much does your crop residue cost you? Over time, residue accumulates in your fields, building excess carbon levels and tying up your plant available nitrogen. Residue also traps P, K, and microbes and can take years to naturally become available to your crops. This is because soil lacks the diverse microbial life needed to break it all down. With Decomp, you can naturally restore life to your soil and allow the release of valuable crop fertility. Learn more about Decomp at eggbio.solutions.
Stop losing money from your stored grain with the EndZone fan control system from Farm Shop MFG. Hot spots and moisture in your bin can cost you thousands in lost revenue. The EndZone monitors outside conditions to run your fans exactly when you want them to, naturally bringing your grain to ideal temperature and humidity. Master bin management with the EndZone. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
One of the cheapest pieces of equipment could be the most valuable thing you buy this year. I'll explain in today's Iron Talk. We'll be out soil sampling this week in the fields that we cut for corn silage on our farm, and on the corn and soybean fields that we're harvesting for grain, we'll be pulling samples there soon too. No matter what your crop rotation, you need soil sample data to guide your fertilization program. A good stainless steel probe is only about a $100 investment. To operate it, I'd suggest making a mark at the depth that you'd like to pull the samples from so you're always accurate. In this case, we made a mark at 6 inches on our soil probe for the most common tests that we're running on our farm. We set up the Ag PhD Soils app to help you build your own grid soil maps. Whether you use this app or just find your own spots in the field to take your soil samples, it only takes about a quart of soil in a sample bag. We recommend pulling 8 to 10 cores per sample in a specific area and bagging each area separately rather than mixing multiple areas across the field together. Make sure that your probe is straight up and down as you pull each sample, and there's not a whole lot more to it than that. A good soil sampling program on our farm guides the hundreds of thousands of dollars we invest in fertility each year. Taking our own samples gives us confidence that we have good data to work from. Judging by our yield increases that we've been able to make and the purity of the water coming out of our tile lines, the return on investment from that $100 soil probe has been very good for our farm, and it will be for your farm too. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but if you're looking for more agronomic information, we'd encourage you to check out our Ag PhD Insider magazine. Just go to agphdinsider.com to learn more.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.